Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye are science engineers all over TV and the internet. Nye is an aeronautical engineer, a one-time member of the team that delivered the Boeing 747. Tyson is an astrophysicist. He likes to say your personal astrophysicist, and director of New York City's Hayden Planetarium. Over the years, both have had lots of mostly sensible things to say about the disastrous prospects of human-caused climate change. But Tyson and Nye now assure us that all GMO technologies in the hands of the same corporate profiteers and rent extractors who are melting the North Pole, Greenland, and a great deal of Antarctica to get that last few trillion in fossil fuel profits, that these are all nothing to worry about, that they're perfectly okay and no cause for concern. To their credit, Tyson and Nye do not themselves just say, "Trust your corporate overlords. Bill Gates and Monsanto just want to feed the world." But they do come pretty close. Bill Nye's Netflix show included a Monsanto exec to say exactly those words. And Tyson appeared opposite a scientist and organic farmer who declared that not one person has ever been poisoned, maimed, or killed by a genetically modified product. Ever since then, that's been both their positions. They're talking more like lawyers than like scientists. Nye and Tyson fail to take into account the waves of tens of thousands of excess suicides occurring among hopelessly indebted poor farmers in India over the last 15 years. These were farmers whose debt load had been greatly increased by dependence on costly commercial seeds and pesticides. They lost their land, their hope, and their lives. Even if Monsanto did not poison them, the seed and pesticide and biotech engineers, or entrepreneurs rather, were part of the machine that killed them. Farmers have been planting seeds, feeding people, saving, exchanging, and planting more seed 10 or 20,000 years without having to pay Monsanto and its allies. But the investors at Monsanto had a vision. They called it value capture in global agriculture, the establishment of new property rights, which would enable them to extract revenue, to collect rent on the ordinary operation of seeds and natural processes. Investors in the new life science and industries tirelessly lobbied government officials for a generation to establish intellectual property rights over seeds and genetic materials, including those found in plants, animals, and humans. Once they got this written into case law and treaties, as I wrote back in 2005, quote, American corporations beginning in the 1990s were able to file a blizzard of patents claiming varieties of rice and wheat grown for centuries in India, beans cultivated before Columbus in Mexico, a staggering array of medicinal plants known and used by local inhabitants of Africa, of South and Southeast Asia, of Amazonia and elsewhere, along with the foods and medicines derived from them and their methods of preparation as the private intellectual property of those corporations. Unquote. That was their plan A for these new genetic engineering entrepreneurs. And it's the clearest possible indication that in their hands, their science amounted to a purely parasitic operation, a jacked up raiding party. Their plan B was even worse. Plan B was the development of something called the Terminator seed. Terminator seed technology, developed by the new genetic engineering industry, amounted to the ability to guarantee that a seed of some vital crop would only last a single generation, so that your farmers, your victims, are forced to pay the owner whose intellectual property they have been carelessly saving, eating, exchanging, and cultivating for thousands of years up until now. The genetic engineering entrepreneurs wanted to use their brand new property rights to turn seed germination off until you or some third world farmers could pay them. This was too naked a play. There was immense pushback all over the world against the development and deployment of Terminator seed technologies, so much that no company wanted to be associated with the term, and they wish we'd forget it now. They call it something else nowadays. Eventually, the U.S. Department of Agriculture was forced to make investors whole by buying up some of the relevant patents and other rights. Neil deGrasse Tyson's argument that everything we eat is genetically modified already, so never mind, doesn't cut it either. The slow process of genetic modification via old-fashioned selective breeding is what got us milk cows and goats and rice, domestic animals and food crops. The pace and scope of changes, though, which are possible with our current and future ability to directly swap genetic material, make this something qualitatively different. Unless, again, you're speaking less like a science educator and more like somebody else's lawyer. The research priorities during the millennia which our ancestors took to develop coffee and sheep and rice and watermelon were also not directed by the same greedy capitalist corporations which tried to give us the Terminator seed, and which did give us cancer alleys in Texas and Louisiana, Mexico too, no doubt, and a toxic dead spot in the Gulf of Mexico the size of New Jersey. When science educators Neil deGrasse Tyson and Bill Nye can talk for hours about genetic engineering without once mentioning corporations, when they can talk about genetic engineering and never about the commons, or whether corporations should be extracting rent from nature and global agriculture, they abandon the curiosity of educators and scientists, and they become PR hacks for powerful corporate parasites whose purpose is to extract rent from the operation of seeds and natural processes. When it comes to genetic engineering, the educational conversation is not about the shiny tools. It has to be about who rules. For Black Agenda Report, I'm Bruce Dixon. Visit us at blackagendareport.com, the only African American owned and oriented site targeted by the Washington Post as being under the alleged influence of the Russians.